to my brother, "If I ever disappear into those endless trees, remember this. Sometimes the wild chooses us for reasons we'll never understand." I thought I went into the woods to hunt, but it was the forest that hunted me. You won't believe how this ends. It's a story that'll shake even the hardest heart and leave you questioning how a tiger could be stalking a man in the hills of Tennessee. The sun rose pale and silver behind a thin veil of mist, filtering light over the ridges like someone pulling gauze across a wound, and I remember the smell of wet pine and the frost biting at my knuckles as I loaded my rifle in the cab of my truck. The engine coughed in the cold, sending white breath into the dawn, and somewhere distant I heard coyotes yipping their eerie chorus as if warning me to turn back. I'd hunted these woods for 20 years, felt I knew every hollow and game trail by heart, but that morning the quiet held a sharpness I couldn't name, as though the forest was holding its breath. My boots crunched over stiff leaves as I walked toward my stand, eyes scanning for deer sign, my thoughts drifting between the hunt and the weight of bills waiting at home. A pair of crows flew overhead, squawking and circling, and I stopped to watch them wheel above the trees, uneasy at how low they dipped and how long they lingered. In a small clearing, I found the tracks. Large, round, padded prints sunk deep into the damp soil, and for a few moments I stood staring, my brain refusing to fit those shapes into anything that belonged here. I told myself it was a big dog, maybe an escaped exotic cat from some roadside zoo, because my mind couldn't stretch to accept what my eyes were telling me. A musky, almost sweet scent clung to the air, mixing with the pine and earth, and I felt a chill trace my spine that had nothing to do with the November cold. Every step deeper into the trees made me more certain something was moving alongside me, matching my pace in silence, and once I glimpsed amber eyes reflecting low between black branches. By the time I reached the ridge, my breath felt thin, my pulse skittering, and the forest seemed to close in tight around me, waiting. The birds went silent so suddenly it was as if someone had thrown a switch, and in that hush my ears strained for any rustle or snap. But all I could hear was my own heart battering like a trapped bird against my ribs. The wind shifted and carried the smell stronger this time, rank and sharp like hot copper, and my stomach turned with the primal certainty that I was no longer the hunter here. I thought of all the stories I'd read about big cats kept illegally in roadside cages, half-starved and waiting for a chance to slip the bars, and how a few had made the news after mauling someone's livestock. But those tales felt like they belonged to some other place, some headline far away, not to these wooded hills I'd walked since childhood. My fingers tightened around the rifle stock, slick with sweat despite the cold, and for the first time in my life I realized how thin the line was between predator and prey. The silence seemed to breathe, like lungs filling and emptying just out of sight, and I kept turning in slow circles, scanning for a shape in the underbrush. I wanted to call someone, to hear a human voice to break the tension, but my phone showed 0 bars and my gut screamed that any sound might draw it closer. The world seemed drained of color except for flashes of red leaves and dark trunks closing me in, and I kept imagining claws raking through the shadows toward my back. Somewhere close, twigs snapped with a sound like knuckles cracking, and my eyes jerked toward the noise, pulse roaring in my ears. My thumb found the rifle's safety, ready to flick it off, my breath shallow and fast, feeling time stretch impossibly thin. The first real glimpse came like lightning, orange and black stripes sliding between 2 oaks, so fluid and silent I wondered if I'd hallucinated it, but then it stopped and stared right at me. Its eyes glowed almost golden, pupils pinched to thin vertical slits, and its chest moved in deep, slow breaths as if it was tasting the air for my scent. Every story I'd ever read about tigers, every documentary voiceover about ambush predators, smashed into my skull all at once, but none of it felt real because I was standing in Tennessee, not the jungles of India. The animal looked bigger than any beast I'd ever seen outside a zoo, shoulders rippling as it shifted its weight, tail twitching, and my brain screamed at me to run, while another part of me froze in stunned awe. I wanted to believe it would turn and vanish back into the trees, just a ghost slipping out of my life, but it crouched lower, muscles coiling like springs, and a low, rumbling growl started deep in its chest. The sound vibrated in the air around me, raising goosebumps all over my arms, and in that instant I knew there was no outrunning it. My rifle suddenly felt too light, too useless, as my vision tunneled into nothing but orange stripes and burning eyes locked on mine. I took one step back, trying to break the stare, but the tiger matched me, slinking forward on massive paws, each step silent as snowfall. A single dry leaf fluttered to the ground between us, and the animal's ears flicked forward, its body tightening. I held my breath, certain the next moment would be teeth and claws. In the silence before it leapt, I remember thinking how absurd it was that the first tiger attack in Tennessee might happen to me, a nobody with a truck and a rifle and bills I could barely pay. The tiger flicked its tail once, twice, and then there was no more distance left between us, only the snap of twigs and a blur of muscle as it sprang. It hit me like a truck, all 200, maybe 300 pounds of solid muscle and sinew crashing into my chest, and the world flipped sideways as my rifle flew from my hands and clattered somewhere in the leaves. I felt the weight of it slam me down, my back smashing against roots and dirt, and before I could even scream I smelled its breath, hot and metallic, laced with the iron tang of old blood. Claws raked across my shoulder, tearing through my jacket and biting into flesh, and an explosion of pain burst like white fireworks behind my eyes as I tried to shove the massive head away from my face. Its fur was slick and coarse under my palms, moving like liquid steel as it twisted and snarled, teeth flashing inches from my throat. I screamed so loud it felt like my lungs were tearing apart, but the forest swallowed the sound, leaving me trapped in a bubble of thrashing orange and black. My mind split between animal panic and this detached thought that I'd never believed a tiger could be that fast, that silent, until it was already on top of me. The weight of it pinned my hips and chest, pressing the air out of my lungs as I scrabbled for anything, a stick, a rock, a handful of dirt. But my fingers came up empty. Its growl rumbled through my ribs, a deep vibration that made me feel as if my bones were shaking apart, and I could feel the hot drizzle of blood running down my side. I tried to twist away, but its claws sank deeper into my shoulder, hooking me like an anchor, and my vision wavered between streaks of red and flashes of blinding white as the pain exploded again and again. The tiger's eyes were inches from mine, shining gold and furious, and its whiskers quivered as it bared its teeth, long yellow fangs glistening with spit and flecks of blood. Every time I blinked, the stripes seemed to crawl over its body, a hypnotic ripple of orange and black that made it look even more unreal, as if it was both here and not here. I felt its breath blasting my cheek, humid and sharp with meat and wildness. And in that second I thought this was how prey must feel in the final moment before the killing blow. I thrashed and bucked, trying to throw it off, but the tiger just rode my struggles like it weighed nothing, pressing harder, its forelegs pinning my arms, claws slicing fabric and skin. It shifted its weight lower, jaws gaping wide, and I could see threads of saliva stretching between its teeth as it lunged for my throat. I threw up my left arm in sheer reflex, feeling teeth close on my forearm like a vice, crushing bone with a crunch so loud it seemed to echo off the trees. A scream burst out of me that didn't even sound human, raw and shredded, as fire ripped through my nerves. Somewhere far off I heard another sound, a single gunshot echoing like a whip crack through the woods, and the tiger jerked its head up, ears flattening, eyes wild and searching. It released my arm with a wet snap, leaving blood pumping from deep punctures, and its growl deepened into something more feral, a roar that vibrated the leaves above us. For a heartbeat, it seemed torn between finishing me and seeking out the new threat, muscles twitching as it shifted its weight side to side. I lay there gasping, too stunned even to move, the copper taste of blood filling my mouth, vision fading in and out as I tried to focus on anything except the agony pulsing in waves through my arm and chest. The tiger swung its massive head toward the trees behind me, lips curled back, whiskers flaring, and I thought if it pounced again, I'd never survive the next hit. I heard my name being shouted, a voice I barely recognized, distant and frantic, and my hope surged and collapsed all at once because whoever it was, they were about to be dead too. The tiger stepped off me in one fluid bound, its weight gone so suddenly I almost thought I'd imagined the whole thing. But then I saw blood dripping from its jaws onto the leaves. I tried to roll onto my side to grab my rifle, but my left arm hung useless and the world tilted and spun, the trees blurring into streaks of brown and green. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I felt like it might burst, each beat shaking my whole body as I clawed at the ground, leaving bloody smears on the dirt. The tiger circled back, low and silent, moving like liquid through the undergrowth, and I caught glimpses of it weaving between the trees, its eyes blazing in shafts of sunlight. The gunshot rang out again, closer this time, and the tiger roared, rearing up on its hind legs as it crashed through a stand of saplings, sending branches snapping and leaves scattering. I heard someone yelling, "Get back!" And then another blast echoed, this time followed by a yowl so piercing it made my eardrums feel like they'd split. The tiger staggered sideways, blood spraying from its flank, but even wounded, it looked impossibly strong, turning to face whoever dared to challenge it. I tried to scream a warning, but my throat locked tight, only a choked gasp coming out as I watched it tense for another charge. In that moment, I knew either it was going to die, or I was. With a final snarl, it lunged again, but the next shot caught it square in the chest, knocking it backward into a shower of leaves and dirt, its body thrashing as it clawed at the air. The sound it made then was nothing like the earlier roar. It was high, wet, almost a scream, filled with pain and fury and something like confusion. I forced myself onto my elbows, vision swimming, and saw the tiger struggling to rise, blood pouring from its side in dark rivers that soaked the leaves beneath it. Another figure crashed through the brush, Jim, my hunting buddy, eyes wide and rifle still smoking, yelling my name as he sprinted toward me. The tiger gave one last violent shudder, then collapsed, its head rolling to the side, eyes open and glazed, stripes vivid even in death. I stared at it, trembling, unable to believe something so powerful could just stop moving. And a sob burst out of me before I even knew I was crying. Jim dropped to his knees beside me, grabbing my good shoulder, his face pale and terrified as he kept looking back at the tiger to be sure it wasn't getting up again. All I could think was how close I'd come to dying, and how the forest seemed to close in around us, suddenly silent except for the ragged sound of my own breathing. The next thing I remember is bright white lights above me, the smell of antiseptic burning my nostrils, and the rhythmic beeping of machines echoing in my skull as if someone were tapping a hammer against metal. I opened my eyes to a hospital ceiling and felt a pain so deep in my arm and chest that I thought I might throw up right there on the bed. My left arm was bound tight in gauze and splints, suspended by a sling from a metal pole, and every breath sent lightning bolts of agony through my ribs. Doctors came and went, talking about tendon damage, blood loss, and the possibility of nerve injury, but their words blurred together into a meaningless hum. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw orange and black stripes lunging at me, teeth flashing, felt claws hooking my flesh like fish hooks. Nurses tried to reassure me, but my whole body shook uncontrollably, and I couldn't stand the soft rustling sound of curtains moving because it reminded me of something slithering through leaves. Family and friends visited, faces drawn tight with fear and pity, and even Jim kept apologizing over and over as if he'd failed me somehow for not firing sooner. The surgeons worked for hours piecing my arm back together, and when they finally let me wake fully, I learned that a couple of my fingers might never move quite right again. The thought hit me like another blow, that the hands I'd used all my life to work, hunt, fix my truck, might never be the same. I lay there feeling stripped bare, my body bandaged and fragile, and it dawned on me how quickly flesh tears and bones snap under something so powerful. Even in the safety of the hospital, the tiger was still there, pacing just behind my eyes, appearing in every flicker of shadow on the walls. Sleep became impossible. I'd drift off for a few minutes and wake screaming, certain I felt weight pressing my chest or the heat of breath against my face. I couldn't bear to watch nature documentaries on the hospital TV because any glimpse of a big cat made me break into a cold sweat. Nurses whispered about trauma therapy and prescribed sedatives, but nothing seemed to touch the terror that coiled tight around my heart. People kept asking the same question: why was there a tiger in Tennessee? And for weeks no one seemed to have a real answer. Some said it escaped from an illegal private collection. Others claimed it came from a bankrupt circus moving through the state. Officials finally traced it back to a man 2 counties over who'd kept exotic animals in rusty cages behind his barn, hidden from the world. But even after hearing that, I couldn't stop replaying the moment it stared at me through the trees, as if it was meant to find me, as if our paths were destined to collide. Sometimes, in the hospital's quiet hours, I'd ask myself why it let me live at all. It could have killed me in seconds, yet it stopped, hesitated, turned away before that final blow. That question haunted me as much as the attack itself. echoing in the back of my skull like the ticking of a clock I couldn't silence. I kept remembering its eyes, not just wild, but almost intelligent, focused on me like it was trying to decide something beyond instinct. It terrified me and fascinated me all at once. When I was finally released, stepping out into the bright, sharp autumn air, I felt the world was sharper and louder than before. My senses were turned up too high. I couldn't walk through my own woods without stopping every few steps to listen for breathing, or checking behind trees for flashes of orange. Leaves rustling in the wind made me flinch as if claws were scraping across my skin again. Sometimes I'd wake at 3 a.m. convinced I smelled that same musky, bloody scent, and I'd stagger through the house turning on every light just to prove it wasn't real. My hunting rifle stayed locked in the safe because the thought of raising a weapon toward an animal made me feel sick and shaky. Jim tried to coax me back out for a short hunt, but the mere suggestion tightened my chest until I couldn't breathe. At home, my dog would sometimes stare into the woods and growl low, the hair rising along his spine, and I'd stand there, frozen, half believing the tiger might somehow be back, stalking me from the shadows. But there were moments, too, where something gentler crept in, a strange compassion I didn't expect. I kept thinking how that tiger didn't ask to be born in a cage or dragged halfway across the world. It was as trapped as I'd been, an apex predator forced into the wrong forests, hunted for simply being what it was. I started reading about tigers, studying their biology, their endangered status, the cruelty of keeping them as pets. And the more I learned, the more the fear tangled with sorrow. Part of me hated it for what it did to my body, my life, but another part wondered if it had spared me for a reason I'd never understand. I began writing down everything I remembered, trying to pour the nightmares out onto paper so they'd stop gnawing at me from the inside. And some nights when sleep finally came, I dreamed not of teeth and claws, but of the tiger standing in dappled sunlight, eyes calm, as if it were silently telling me it was sorry too. The months crawled by, each day another small victory as I learned how to button shirts with one stiff hand, how to hold a coffee cup without my arm shaking so badly I spilled it all down my front. The scars on my shoulder and forearm puckered into shiny ridges that caught the light like silver fish scales, and sometimes people would stare before quickly looking away. I stopped trying to hide them because they felt like proof I was still here. My family tiptoed around me at first, afraid to mention the tiger, afraid even to talk about the woods. But as the seasons turned, I found I wanted to talk about it. Not just the pain, but the moment when I realized how small we humans really are, and how thin the veil is between life and death. The forest felt different now, less like my domain and more like a place I was merely borrowing for a while. And every time I stepped beneath those trees, I felt the tiger's presence lingering like a ghost. I started visiting local schools, telling kids about wildlife laws, about why big cats don't belong in cages, about what it means to respect predators even when they terrify you. And every time I spoke, my heart hammered, but I did it anyway because silence felt heavier than fear. Jim and I drifted apart for a while, both of us haunted in our own ways by that day. He blamed himself for not firing faster, though I kept telling him he saved my life. And that was the truth. We finally met for coffee one crisp January morning, sitting in a greasy diner as the steam curled off our mugs, and we talked for the first time about what we saw in the tiger's eyes, how alive it was, how desperate, how out of place in those Tennessee woods. We sat there for hours, neither of us touching our food, remembering every sound, every color, every second that felt like it stretched into eternity. Jim confessed he'd been having nightmares too, that sometimes in his sleep he heard the roar echoing off the hills. I reached across the table, awkward with my half-frozen fingers, and gripped his wrist. We didn't say anything more after that because there wasn't anything left to say. Some things you can only share in silence. A wildlife group contacted me after reading about my story, inviting me to join them in lobbying for stronger laws against private ownership of exotic animals. I agreed, not just for myself, but for that tiger who shouldn't have been there at all. I started attending hearings in Nashville, speaking into microphones while lawmakers shifted in their seats. And each time I spoke, I tried to remind them the tiger wasn't a monster. It was an animal forced into a life it never chose. Some nights back at home I'd lie awake replaying the way it looked at me that day, as if weighing whether I deserved to live. I found myself torn between hating it and wishing I could have seen it run free, deep in some sun-dappled jungle where it belonged. I kept a photo on my desk of a tiger in the wild, muscles rippling as it moved through tall grass, and sometimes I'd trace the stripes on the picture with my good fingers, imagining a world where that animal never crossed paths with men like me. Last fall, I finally went back to the ridge where it happened, hiking slow and careful up the slope, my steps crunching in leaves that glowed gold under the low sun, my breath frosted in the air, my pulse thumping hard in my throat. But I kept going until I stood in the exact spot where the tiger charged me. I half expected to feel panic seize me again, but instead, I felt an overwhelming sadness and something close to gratitude. I knelt down and pressed my palm into the earth where my blood had soaked into the leaves. Then I stood and whispered into the trees that I forgave the tiger, and I hoped that wherever its spirit wandered, it was finally free. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe. On the hike back, I found myself noticing birdsong and the way the light flickered between the branches, and I realized I was still here, still alive, carrying the scars, but also the lessons. These days, I've stopped trying to forget what happened. Instead, I carry it like a compass, reminding me how easily the world can turn wild. I've learned that sometimes surviving isn't about killing the thing that hunts you. It's about learning how to live beside the fear, without letting it devour you whole. I still dream of the tiger sometimes, but it's not always attacking me. Sometimes, it's just standing there in the trees, watching me with those golden eyes, calm and almost gentle, as if it knows something I don't. And if there's one thing I know now, it's this. That day, the forest didn't just leave a scar on my body. It carved a truth into my soul.